A very good evening to you and thank you for staying with us. So this is Weekend Prime right here on Newsroom Africa, Channel 405. Now, the IEC has held public hearings on the draft Political Party Funding Act. According to the Act, political parties and donors must disclose donations above 100,000 Rand in a financial year, and there is a maximum donation amount for private donors of 15 million Rand per year per party. Now, to discuss this, I'm joined in the studio by the ANC Member of Parliament, Mr. Vincent Smith, as well as our very own contributor here on Newsroom Africa, Aubrey Masango. A very good evening to both of you, gentlemen.
Good evening to you, Thami.
Now, what are your thoughts on this political party funding bill?
Good evening to you and your listeners. Thami, let me first correct it. I'm not a Member of Parliament any longer. I was a Member of Parliament in the previous Parliament. But in terms of the question, we think that it was long overdue. South Africa was probably one of the very few countries that never regulated political party funding. There was no obligation on political parties to disclose or to account for who funded them. And now we think that we've come in line with the progressive countries of the world.
And from your perception, why has it actually taken this long for it to actually be implemented? And what has been the general reaction from other political parties?
I can't answer why it's taken so long, but I do know that the African National Congress had its resolutions way back in 2007 talking about regulating political party funding. In terms of what is the general view amongst political parties and civil society for that matter, I think everybody welcomes it, that it must be that political parties are transparent about who funds them so that the will of the people is never usurped by narrow private interests by those who are moneyed. So I think people welcome the Political Party Funding Act.
Yep. I actually wanted to stay a little longer, Mr. Smith, on the question of why it's taken so long. You'll remember that even in the late 90s, at the dawn of the new dispensation, organizations such as IDASA were calling for greater transparency. But the whole issue of party political funding is the one area that political parties seem to agree on in terms of not necessarily wanting to disclose who it is that funds them. What has changed to the point where now there's a bill that might actually become law?
Well, there's an act. The President has signed it in January this year. So it's an act. It's just about implementing it. I think in the past, political parties were wary that if their funders were known generally, that those funders would probably be disadvantaged by the parties that are in government. And we think that has been dispelled because there is legislation that would assist people who feel that they are being disadvantaged because they support or contribute to a political party from not participating in the economy. So I think that has dispelled. I think it's about maturity of political parties, and it's not too late to start now. But sure. Yes, it's 24 years later, but I think it's a good time to start.
I mean, it came into effect on the 1st of April. Obviously, it was too late to have it, implemented for the past elections. But, speaking to the question that Aubrey's asking, why the sudden change of heart? And is perhaps this interrogation of party funding going to be retrospective? Because now, moving forward, obviously, the political parties can try and clean up their act. But there are several politicians, the president being one of them, yes, in as much as it talks about the CR17 campaign and its intra-party funding. But you will find that some of these corporations and some of these companies have been, financing and funding some of these parties historically. Is there a requirement for, I guess, disclosure pre-April of 2019?
Unfortunately, the law doesn't work that way. It will be effective from the date that it becomes an act. So anything that happened before the President signed the bill into an act, there's no obligation to make that public. So we can't go historically, but certainly going forward, everything should be for public consumption.
I mean, in the interest of transparency, because that's what we're talking about now, there is no law that's requiring, certain individuals to become transparent about who is funding them. But for the sake of transparency, all of that is coming out now. Do you think that there will be an exercise of that same quote-unquote good faith, from other entities?
I can't talk about other entities. I think if we talk to the requirements of the Act and compliance to the Act, parties will be obliged to do it going forward. Whether they are going to be prepared to disclose what happened in the past, I guess political parties will have to answer that individually.
Let's talk a little bit about the mechanics of how this process is going to work. Is there a specific reason why the IEC is chosen to be the one that is going to oversee the process? And secondly, how will the funding actually work? Will it work in terms of the proportional representation that each party in Parliament has? How is it actually going to work?
Well, the IEC currently administers party funding that comes from the fiscus. So it made it perfectly logical for us to say, we are going to expand your mandate. You're doing it currently, we'll expand your mandate. You will not only look after or monitor funds that come from the fiscus, which they do already, but also funds that come from private donors into the Multi-Party Democracy Fund. And we thought they were the best body to do that. So yes, the IEC will do that for us. It's about whether they have the capacity. And if they have the capacity, then I think they are the best body to do that for us.
And Mr. Smith, talking about private party funders and donors, there are quite a couple of restrictions there in the sense that you cannot accept donations from companies outside of South Africa, whether it's foreign government or foreign entities. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, we are very clear as the African National Congress that the sovereignty of South Africa is not for sale. So that you allow foreign forces or foreign governments to fund a political party would be dangerous for our sovereignty. So we're quite comfortable that foreign donations should not be allowed. And in many, many countries in the world, foreign donations are just not allowed. What
if it's not foreign governments, but foreign business, for example?
Well, we are saying foreign business and foreign, like the European Union and those type of people, can certainly fund for training and capacity building, but not directly to a political party for the normal political work that it's doing. We just think that it should be limited to South Africans, because that's the people that we serve as political parties, and it's their interest that we must forever bear in mind and put on top of our lists, and not be beholden to funders from outside of our countries.
On that, it appears that the IEC may need not only to have the capacity to administer the fund, but to police the process of who and who doesn't fund political parties. What have you done in terms of the capacitating of the IEC to be able to police that, I don't know, company X in Russia doesn't fund political party Y in South Africa?
Well, when we were working on the bill and our act, we did indicate that the IEC needs to set up a unit that is going to be dedicated to the management of political party funding, separate to the unit that does with the election work. So they're going to have capacity. Hopefully they will get the necessary budget from Treasury, but they would have the capacity, one, in human and also in other resources to be able to monitor it. I know that they have said that it will be staggered because they are busy working on that very question now as the IEC during their public hearings last month. And I think that once that unit is set up, they would be able to, from the information we give them as political parties, be able to monitor if we are in compliance. But also remember, they've got to make it public. And you and any other citizen will be able to go to them and say, we know that Party A has in fact received money from proceeds of crime. I'm using it as an example. They then have the capacity to call that party to account.
And we'll certainly continue with this conversation after the break. We are focusing this evening on the political party funding. It is now into law, and see how that affects the political parties and South Africans at large. This is Weekend Prime. Do stay with us. Thank you for staying with us. This is Weekend Prime. We continue our discussion this evening regarding political party funding. And with us in the studio, we're joined by Mr. Vincent Smith, as well as our very own Mr. Aubrey Masango, Newsroom Africa's contributor, and Mr. Smith from the African National Congress. Now, before the break, we were talking about who is going to be regulating the funds, who is going to be administrating them. And you said the ISC has already been doing it before. They just need to build up capacity to ensure that they're able to regulate all the extra, tidbits that are now on their table. But let's look at the maximum amount of funding that different individuals can actually contribute to the parties.
Yes, the Act or the regulations stipulate that no individual can donate more than 15 million per annum to the political party. And the rationale that we used at the time was that we didn't want a party to be able to receive money from an individual to such a large extent that that individual dictates the terms. We thought 15 million was more or less a figure that is manageable. I must indicate that certain political parties feel that that figure is a bit too low. And it's for them, obviously, to argue that when regulations are reviewed. But we took a view that 15 million per year, per individual, would not allow that individual to dictate the terms of the political party's trajectory.
So when you talk individual, you're talking person and you're also talking corporate as a company.
Correct.
Now, what happens in an instance where a company might decide to split the amount that they want to donate, and use like 10 different individuals within that company, but the money is still coming from the same source to the threshold of 15 million rand? Because I don't know what the political party funding amounts have been for the ANC specifically, but that 15 million does seem quite low.
Well, maybe it does seem quite low, but what we've also tried to do is to introduce dual reporting. We've said that these entities you're talking about should be able to, or must, report in their general reports or the annual reports how much they funded political parties collectively. So if it is company X, Y, and Z, even if 15 different directors gave money, they would have to, in their general report at the end of the year or their annual report, say that organization X funded so much money cumulatively to party X, Y, and Z. And we're hoping that South Africans will do the right thing. And also, if people are going to bend the law, hopefully somebody will come to the party and say, look, this law has been bent, firstly. Secondly, we've asked political parties to give audited financial statements. I don't think an auditor will append his signature if he knows that something is not kosher in how funds were given to a political party. So we're hoping that all those mechanisms will help, one, in transparency, but it will also help people to do what is correct in terms of the law.
We have had instances where the auditing fraternity itself has been under scrutiny. So how confident are you that we can actually rely on companies giving credible information, specifically considering the history of malpractice within the auditing industry?
I don't want to comment on the auditor's performance past and present, but we have to, in good faith, believe that those that are charged as auditors to do the books of organizations do what they are supposed to do. Of course, there might be hiccups here and there, like there is all over, but we think that they'll have to turn the corner, or they have turned the corner, and that their word would be an honorable word when they say we've done the audit. It's a fair reflection of the finances of political party X, Y, and Z. That's all that we can hope for.
And I suppose, Thami, and this is really the question, it's really about what seems to be a reality of a deficit of trust in this country. Not only for government, political parties, even corporates, and Thami mentions the auditing fraternity, which is under a lot of strain in terms of credibility at the moment. All of these measures are to try and make things as transparent as possible and hopefully to ramp up that credibility deficit issue. What are people, individuals or statutory persons buying for their money when they donate to political parties? What are they actually getting? And I suppose that's a question you've been dealing with as the ANC at the moment right now with the whole CR17 campaign issue.
Yeah. Well, I can tell you that big business, when they came to present to us and also when they went to present to the IEC last month, are very, very clear that we need an political environment that's conducive for business to do business. So I think what they're buying is a party or parties or the democratic project to be such that the environment for business to do business is there and they flourish. So I think big business are very clear that that's what they want. I think the ordinary individual, you and I, when we go and put our X next to party A or party B, we want to be sure that that X will translate into that party implementing its manifesto, because we all have manifestos as political parties, and that not my X doesn't count because I don't have money and Aubrey, who may have deep pockets, dictates the policy trajectory of the ANC. So you're buying peace of mind as an ordinary individual. You're buying an environment that is conducive to doing business if you're big business.
I'd like to, sorry, Aubrey, get a bit of clarity on this, and we spoke about this a little bit earlier on, the restriction for foreign companies and foreign governments to be able to contribute. In the instance of a foreign company, when they have a subsidiary in South Africa, does it then still count as it being a foreign company, or will the local subsidiary suffice to have it qualify as non-foreign?
No, I think that if you're a subsidiary of a foreign country, a company that is foreign-based, we will regard it as foreign funding, regardless of whether you are a South African subsidiary of that fund, because we would look at the entity or the juristic person, which might be a company registered overseas. So we would look at it as an overseas registered company. What I must say, and political parties did raise this thing around foreign funding. When we created this act, said that parties can only receive a maximum of 5 million rand from foreign companies, and it must be for training and capacity building and so on. Many political parties, including the ANC, feel that 5 million rand is really not enough. You send 3 people or 5 people to any country in the world, that 5 million rand is used up. So unfortunately, we can't do anything now, but when the regulations are reviewed in a year's time, I think people will have to re-look at whether 5 million rand is reasonable for training, capacity building, and policy formulation that would be received from foreign countries. And I know that many political parties have felt that that is a figure that is a bit too low.
The entrance of the conversation about money in anything, whether it's soccer, whether it's broadcasting, begins to muddy the waters sometimes if you take into consideration the initial mandate for political parties. There's some who hold the opinion that this is the commercialization of politics, that politics are now becoming business entities in and of themselves, and they have lost the original mandate for political parties, and that is to be the bearers of the civic duties that political parties are supposed to have. Are we not running into that space now where we have made capitalists out of people who wear red T-shirts?
Well, maybe I should say that democracy is an expensive exercise anywhere in the world. And that is why the Constitution, Section 236, says that we must have national legislation that regulates party funding to enhance multi-party democracy, because it's an expensive exercise to run a political party. Whether we've gone too far is a debate for another day, but I can tell you that without funding political parties, at least those that are represented, we run the risk of our democracy crumbling. And that's what we need to look at. We obviously can't take all the resources to political parties, but there must be some fine balance that says we need democracy in the country. These are the vehicles for democracy, being political parties as one, not the only one, and therefore we must fund them appropriately. And what is appropriate is something that I would imagine Minister of Finance and other people would tell us what is appropriate.
And as we wrap up this evening, there's been a lot of talk and controversy within the African National Congress regarding internal funding for internal conferences and elections as well. What are the learnings that you might have taken from this entire process of getting this bill passed that you feel will likely be implemented or at least discussed and considered within the ANC moving forward?
Well, first of all, this bill deals with represented political parties. But the President was listening to him, I think, on Thursday when he was answering in Parliament. He said maybe the opportunity has now arrived for everybody in South Africa, not just political parties, to look at the need to regulate or otherwise intra-party funding. It's not part of this bill. And if the Sixth Parliament feel that they want to make it legislation, then I'm sure they would do that. If parties are then left to do their own regulation, I'm sure parties will do that. But I do know that the president of the ANC, when I was listening to him, said that he initiated such a discussion at the last NEC meeting, and hopefully the ANC will take it forward in their next, or going forward, the ANC will take it and work on it. I think the lessons that I learned is that we must be very clear, all of us, that where there's funds involved, we must be able to say that they are used for the reasons why they were given to us.
Will this bill or this act now also include civil society organizations, NGOs and so forth?
No, it won't. It's represented political parties. I mean, there's even an argument that is going around that says, if I'm a political party but not represented in the legislature or at a national level, why can't I benefit from it? Unfortunately, the section that deals with it in the Constitution talks about represented political parties. I might as well also add that when we were looking at this, local government was also saying to us, but why are we not part of it? Because they are also political parties, and this act only talks to national and province.
Yes.
New parliament would have to look at including local government as well.
And what are your thoughts on the inclusion of local government in an act such as this?
Well, I think it's necessary. I think it's necessary because the ANC, for instance, operates at national, provincial and local level. So why would you fund a party at province and national and not at local level when what they do in essence is the same thing? And quite honestly, local government is probably the far more important than the other governments. So if we want this thing to work for what it's intended to, I do think we need to include local government.
Sorry, if local government is not included here, do we not run the risk of local government party structures being a conduit for the receiving of money from people and organizations that, in terms of the law, are not supposed to be providing that funding?
Absolutely. But the Act now says that when you report as the ANC, as an example, you would report as a single entity at a national level. So whether you receive from a branch, and we've got more than 4,700 branches, or from a municipality, God forbid, you're still going to have to account to the IEC on that regard. But you're right, if I'm a party that is only local government based, nowhere in the province, nowhere nationally, it means that I don't benefit from these funds.
I asked that question, Thami, because you'll know with the unfortunate story of VBS, it was local government that was depositing money, unlawfully so, into that particular bank. And it appears that when laws of this nature are created, that is the one tier of government that isn't looked at, but that's where the greatest number of shenanigans can take place. Isn't there room at this point to change the law and include? Because that's where the problems have actually been.
I'm sure that Parliament is going to look at it urgently, I'm sure, because we made that part of our recommendations when we passed the Act, or recommended the Act to be passed. And I have no doubt that organizations like SALGA, who look after local government, political parties themselves will put pressure on Parliament to amend or to bring into effect another piece of legislation that covers local government. It's necessary.
And let's certainly hope that this is something that happens before the next local government elections. But sir, we thank you so much for your time this evening. And thank you to you as well, Aubrey.
Thank you.
Even though you're family. That was a member of the ANC, Mr. Vincent Smith there, and our own contributor, Aubrey Masango, as we focus on the Political Party Funding Act. Do stay with us after the break. We return with more news and headlines.